Welcome to another episode of Don't Call It Small. I'm your host, Natasha Foreman. If you don't know me and you have no clue what this podcast is all about, let me share a bit. I'm the CEO of Foreman & Associates, LLC, where we provide consulting, business support, and professional development services. And Don't Call It Small is where we talk all things business, share tips and news that you can use, and highlight the people and ideas behind the products and services that we buy. To learn more about our team, please visit foremanllc.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. Oh my goodness, so much is taking place. Let's see, this is episode 34. Oh my goodness. Let's see, what's been going on? A lot has been going on. We're having a health and economic crisis all around the world. So this episode is very timely as we look at leadership and management during the 3 phases of crisis. And, some people are managers and they're not leaders, and some people are leading and they don't know how to empower and to find the right managers. So I strongly feel that people should find a way to be both a great leader and manager. And what I mean by that is a leader is a person who can have the vision, inspire, encourage, motivate people to reach a goal, right? To achieve a goal. And managing is the way in which you take all the corresponding resources that you are then going to plan and organize and, of course, motivate, right? Lead and control to be able to gauge how on target or off target you are. Those are the various components. So you don't have to be a leader to be a manager. And so with that, sometimes we find ourselves in various predicaments where we have reason to question the leaders who are responding to certain issues, matters, crises, and we start scratching our head. And the reason why we scratch our head is because we realize that some people are actually being managers. They're not serving as leaders, and definitely not the type of leaders that we want to risk it all with. So what we're going to address are crises. And you have to understand, in business, in organizations, there's always a need for crisis management. There's always something, there's always a fire, right, so to speak, that has to be put out. There's some kind of drama, there's something that is going to require leaders and managers to zoom in to bring about manageable solutions. So on the extreme of that, we can look at what we're currently going through, which feels like a massive meltdown. But this is something that organizations should actually plan for. We always say it like, what's the worst case scenario? And I believe that most people, when they're thinking of worst case scenario, they're thinking of worst case scenario of one minute detail that makes up that organization. And when you form your company or you take over the reins of a company, you should always sit back with your leadership team and say, what's the worst case scenario that could impact this company? And let's plan for that. While we're always doing our other operational, strategy sessions, so on and so forth. But if we're saying the worst possible thing that can happen to us is that this company goes belly up, our employees are, out on the streets, there is no recovery effort whatsoever. If that's the worst case scenario for your particular organization, then from inception, you need to plan for how will we counteract all of the different barriers, but you can say proponents that will lead to those things. So if you're saying what external factors, what things that can be impacted by government, by the economy, by epidemics, pandemics, wars, fluctuations with interest rates, with inflation, all of these different things, all of these things externally can impact your organization internally. So what things are you putting into play? And you'll constantly be maneuvering and pivoting and adjusting for every single month. And what we're seeing right now, 2020, if we have hundreds of companies that never planned for the what if. And, you know, I was talking to Octavia Weems, that if you recall, I interviewed her last year, and it was just this interesting conversation we were having, because we always tell small businesses, this is what we always tell small businesses, whether you go to SBA, no matter which platform you go to, small business owners are always told that when they're going for launch, make sure that you can plan for 12 to 18 months of budget for operational needs, so on and so forth, right? We do this whole pitch so that you are secure that if there is no money coming in, that you have this operational, piggy bank that you can dig into to cover your expenses. What happens? Where is the transition in a business's life where that is no longer the rule, right? It is no longer just a standard practice, that we then position ourselves where we no longer have 12 to 18 months of reserves. And is it a case that so many companies didn't start off with it to begin with? Like, where is it that we say it, but we're not walking the walk? And you can see this in small business, mid-sized business, large businesses. You have large businesses that are facing complete meltdown, destruction, closing doors, that have no reserves. They are literally living day by day, customer by customer, transaction by transaction. How is that an example for the small business? How is that an example for the aspiring entrepreneur? Because that is usually the motivation for wanting to enter into the world of business, is you see these thriving larger enterprises and you say, one day I want to be that way. Well, let's look at what this one day results in, because you are following their lead. And here's where their lead has left you, is that there is no reserves. We tell regular day consumers that we need to have 3 to 6 months of emergency cash so that we can be able to, in case of whatever emergency, we go into our savings and we can withdraw the savings to cover emergency. But the thing is that the vast majority of people don't have the 3 to 6 months. And interesting enough, you can see that we have companies that don't have 3 to 6 months of reserves. So this example of what we're going through, what some countries have been going through since the end of 2019, what the U.S. has now been feeling since around February of 2020, is the reality that people are talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk. They are not planning for a crisis. I guess we think that somehow we're going to click our heels like Dorothy and we're just going to end up home and everything's good and there's apple pie and, food and all of our friends waiting for us. And Toto's going to run over and jump in our lap. When the reality is that so many people are going to end up destitute. And those dreams and those goals and those plans that they had are going to be stomped on. And we're going to be looking around like, what in the world happened? This is the reality, whether you're talking about a virus or not, is the reality is that people are not planning for crisis. If you recall a few episodes ago, I talked about succession planning. I talked about that every business owner, every organization should plan for the succession of your top leading employees. So your star employees, if they leave by choice, by force, or because they took their last breath, right? Who is next in line? Who do you already have teed up, trained, ready to go? If your CEO gets ousted or is forced to resign, like Wells Fargo had two back-to-back CEOs. The first, the CEO, then the COO who stepped in to be CEO later, then resigns. You have two CEOs that resign. Who do you have that's keyed in, ready to go, that's programmed into what steps are the organization going to take, and how will they lead differently than the ones before them? Because if you're leading the exact same way, you're probably going to lead everyone back to the same trap, pit, dead end, septic tank spill that the ones before led them to. So these different variables have to come into play. And I know that a lot of people don't want to plan that way, but for most, I'll say small businesses, right? You're a micro enterprise, you're a solopreneur, you have, less than 50 workers, you have less than 100 workers, however you want to define your business. You're definitely not, and let me help you, you're not a Hewlett Packard, you're not a Walmart, you're not an Amazon, you're not a McKinsey and Company, you're not a Bain and Company, you're not a Kroger, you're not a Publix, you're not a Ralph's. Do you get the gist of what I'm saying? How are you going to plan for your last day in your role as the founder, CEO, whatever fancy title you have? How are you planning for your exit, and who is going to replace you? And if you have issues dealing with that reality, that means that your business dies when you leave. If that is cool with you, if you're okay with telling your workers, hey, when I'm out of here, you guys are jobless, then okay, this is just going to be clearly a psychological, a sociology experiment, a social experiment, right? Like, you just want to see what kind of psychological warfare that you can expend upon your workforce. That, you thought you had a job, and let's see, it's a gamble. How long will you have a job? So you're betting that I'm gonna be with the company, whether through life or death, longer than whatever nature the creator says. That's not how you should operate your organization. So thinking of those different variables for something such as that, thinking of things such as how will we handle if our customers react strongly to a negative article or reporting against our company. How will we counteract that so that we don't lose customers, and in turn, in losing customers, we lose sales, our revenues drop, we don't have any reserves, and that means our employees are going to suffer, which means we're going to lose employees either through them quitting or we're going to have to lay them off. Either way, this is a no-win. So how can we plan for that? So we have the 3 stages of crisis. Pre-crisis, crisis, right? You're in it, right? You're knee deep, elbows deep, neck deep in the crisis. And then you have post-crisis. After the storm has passed and you're looking at all of, the debris and damage left behind, the squeaky toy that was in the pool that's now on the neighbor's roof, 4 houses down, that kind of post-assessment. And within those 3 major phases, we have roughly 5 to 6 mini stages that make that up. The very first thing with any type of crisis is you always have warning, right? It doesn't just it just plops on you. There's nothing that just plops on you. Tornadoes, it just doesn't just manifest out of nowhere. There's always a warning. There's always some type of shift in the weather patterns, and usually your pets. Animals usually alert humans. Humans, we're just, we're too smart to be, we're just I don't know what to say about humans. All these brain cells, and they just don't want to fire the right way for us. But our animals will let us know about weather patterns. They'll let you know, and that's the reason why pet owners will tell you about their birds, their cats, their dogs, their whatever they have that started acting differently, started trying to get their attention, started having these behaviors that they normally don't have, and then, moments later, whether it's hours or whatever later, then this catastrophe hits, right? This natural disaster hits. And they say, oh my goodness, I didn't pay attention to, spoof or, Butters or whatever you want to call your pet's name. And so the same is true with what we're going through right now with COVID-19, aka coronavirus, which COVID-19 is a coronavirus. We have other coronaviruses, but it's catchier to say coronavirus because, it's just catchy. So COVID-19, there were warnings, leading up to the crisis. We have to do a risk assessment. And so you have the warning. Now, businesses, organizations, this always encompasses government. A government is a business, folks. It's an organization. It's got payroll. It's got all the functions of a business. So when I say business, that always includes government. And let me always say, it also includes religious institutions like churches, mosques, so on. If they have payroll, if they have bills, let's just put them in the whole heading, their business. So I want to make sure I clarify that. You have the warning, and with that, it doesn't matter where in the world a crisis takes place, you have to assess your risk. And looking at the reality that where's we talk about degrees of separation, where are those degrees of separation to how that impact wherever that is, whatever state that is, whatever country that's in, how can that impact our organization? How can that impact the community that our organization serves and the communities that our organization wants to serve? So we have to assess our risk. You can't just say, oh, that's happening over in China. Okay, well, let's look at all of the different variables of who trades with and does business with China, who travels to and from China, and what of our products are either somehow manufactured or assembled or whatever in China, and then how does that then overflow into our reality? Because we can say, oh no, we get all of our things, all of our stuff is made in America, and then you start to break down the components that make up your product, and it could be assembled in America. You could have a lot of various elements of it that are from America, but then all of a sudden you start seeing you have elements of your product that are from 5 other countries, one of which could be China, right? And then you say, oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So you can't just narrowly think that because something is not directly in your backyard that it doesn't impact you. So the second stage is having to do a risk assessment and seeing in what ways are we going to be impacted directly and indirectly. Because if you happen to have a product or you have an infrastructure that is reliant upon consumers to spend heavily in order for you to not just stay afloat, but to thrive, if people fear or have hesitation or start getting very conservative with their spending, that means they're going to be less inclined to then patronize your establishment, buy your products, and your services. They'll say, I can pass. I really don't need that. I can wait. And then you find yourself slowly going out of business. So you have to look broadly and put on multiple lenses. You almost have to be like, a fly, a spider. Spider's a good one. I don't like them though. Oh goodness, I don't like them. I don't like flies either. Just thinking about them right now, I really not know how well I feel about this example I'm giving. But how they have this optical ability to look in all these different angles, right? And in doing so, they can see within this periphery that most people may not scan and be able to notice without having to fully turn your head, right? And even then, some of us are just really bad at being able to discern and identify certain things. So imagine if you put on these lenses of sort and you're looking through all of these different ways and perspectives of what does this truly entail. There's your risk assessment, because you're not just going to say, oh no, it's just this right here, it's just affecting this region right here. That's what the US did, right? That's what our government did when we said, oh no, this is just a China disease. Okay, that was such a narrow, I mean, maybe a preschooler. I can't really conceive of a first grader. I think a first grader would have been able to say and really articulate the conceptual picture that China has neighbors and people fly to China and people travel to and from. And so with that, it can't just be contained in China. It would, of course, go all over the place. And I think a first grader could figure that one out. I really do. So I know that a lot of the statements, which were part of the response, right, had to do with trying to keep, number one, humans in our weakness from frantically doing what so many people are doing right now. It was to help to keep down rioting and looting and various crimes and violence, and because you'd have a pandemic at the same time you're having absolute like Purge the movie antics going on. People would just go ballistic. And so I get that that's the reason why they try to be low key. The problem is that the United States, unlike China, does not have state-run media, which although I know the current president would love for us to have state-led media, which means that the government then runs all broadcasting of news, which is what China has, right? They then control that to keep from having basically to not have what we have in the U.S., where everyone has an opinion, and that opinion can be spewed and sprayed any kind of way, and we can convolute it any kind of way we want, and then later we just like redact and say, oops, our bad, we reported that wrong, right? So versus having that, which we don't have, is what China has, which is government-led. Now, had we had a state-led media, most of us would not know what we know now until maybe the end of this month or April. So what you found out so far, you would probably not know at this point when the information started flowing in around January. Because understand that if you're using your logic hat, you're putting that logistic hat in your brain, and you're flipping all those switches. If it shows the timeline that all of these things actually started rolling out towards the end of the year of 2019, that means that other power structures, other countries, you have the presidents and prime ministers, so on and so forth, new information long before it starts rolling out through the byways of the World Health Organization and CDC, so on and so forth. So I say that to say that that is not a good example of what to follow when you're looking at your leadership structure and how you go about leading during crisis. Your response is the third stage. Response is, and you notice I said response, not react. And what we do normally as humans, those that are not properly trained in managing their behavior, what we do is we react to our circumstances, versus sitting back and pausing and analyzing and looking at other alternatives and considerations. We react. And in reacting, we usually, 9 times out of 10 do something very moronic. So the third stage in this management phase is how we go about responding. And that is going to require you to then, as a leader, pull all your resources in. So you're going to then have your management teams set up, right? And they should already be set up. You should already have designated people within your organization that are crisis managers, that are always considering, because there's always something happening in the world, people, always. There's always some kind of war, some kind of outbreak of something. There's always something. There's some kind of sex scandal. There's always something that is going on. So you have to have a crisis management team. I don't care if it's a team of 3. Just don't let it be a team of 1. That's a recipe for disaster. You can't. And those number of people, however many they are, it has to be small. Any team that you create must always be small. If it's large, you just might as well just throw your hands up and like slap yourself. So it needs to be a small, tight team. And let me help you with that. U.S. football, U.S. basketball, or just basketball in general. If you notice that each team has so many players that they have on the field at one time, they have on the court on one time. Soccer, known as football everywhere else in the world except for the U.S., has so many players that are on the field on both teams. They don't have all of their players at the same time. So many on each team, and that they rotate through. There's a cap as to how many players they'll have on an entire roster of a team. So everything is because of what it can be properly managed. There's only so many people and personalities that you can manage, and only so many people that can perform the functions and duties and tasks that you need done the right way on time, right? So you can't have 100 people on a team. No. You can break that 100 people up into smaller teams and then assign certain tasks to those teams. But one big team of 100, yeah, you guys all just might as well just be sitting back watching Sesame Street all day, because that's as much as you're going to get accomplished, really. So you have to make sure that you have your teams in place that can respond. And what you're doing in this response is you're using the data that you've collected in your risk assessment. And then from there, you're looking at the outward possibilities of what could be. What are the possible solutions? What are the possible ways that you can pivot? How can you maneuver a different way? What is plan B, C, D, E, F to Z, right? Because you're taking in consideration all the what ifs. This is where you can have people that, and these team members need to be your sharpest bunch. Like you don't need anyone who's lazy-minded, who can never find solutions, only problems. Those are the worst people. Now, unless you just want to bounce an idea off of one of those individuals, because then at that point they may see a problem that you just never considered, and you're like, oh gosh, Bob is right. There's that problem. That's a potential problem. But other than that, you don't need a whole bunch of those Bobs in your team, because they'll sour the whole bunch. People are going to turn on Bob big time. So you need to make sure you have various personalities, different perspectives. And in that, you're having to now really map out. You can't be casual about it. You can't be lazy about it. You have to really sit back and pull these layers apart. It's like a puzzle piece, and everything is scattered. And then you're like, okay. And some pieces got put together, and you're like, those pieces don't work. Let's pull them all out, and let's now work. And we can separate this puzzle, and everyone has their different pieces, and we'll put them together so we can see what can work. And through that, once you have really found some viable answers to those problems, viable solutions to those problems, you then go into the management role. That's the fourth stage within a crisis, is now we have to manage this crisis. And that is where you then, of course, have all of your designated managers over the specific teams, processes, so on and so forth, are segmented, and they know specifically what they are supposed to do. As I've said in previous episodes, that what most employees complain about are that when tasks are delegated, and I can't remember which episode I talked about delegation. I should have had it in my notes, but I forgot. I free flow on certain things, and I may write down notes somewhere, but I didn't. Um, Planning, right? Look at this example right there. Planning. Didn't plan to put the notes for that. But on all seriousness, when we're looking at delegating, some of the issues that a lot of employees have problems with their managers is that you did not make clear the task that's being delegated. You didn't give me the authority to execute this task. So that means my coworkers are going to just brush me off. And you did not engage with me to really find out my perspectives on how to execute the task. You just left it to my own devices. And then you didn't provide me with enough resources and time, and if necessary, money in order to complete all of the things I need to make sure that this task is done. And that is some of the biggest issues that employees have through the delegation. Well, anytime something has to be managed, that means there's always delegation. You have the 3 rungs of an organization: your senior, mid-level, and frontline. That means that on each of those layers, those are managers, right? And so that means there's delegation. You have the overarching strategy that the senior team has, devised, and that is broken down tactically so that we know which divisions, departments, areas, regions are going to be responsible for doing what. And then from that, it has to be operationalized, right? Because we have to have this stuff rolling, because that is the only way that we can make sure the task can be completed to have the goal achieved or the crisis resolved, however you want to look at it. So we have to make sure that in that management stage, that you're putting all of the components in place so that you can track the progress. So you've gone through, and you're going through the planning. So we're planning out who's going to be responsible for doing what the benchmarks are, how often we're going to be checking in, because you can't micromanage. That gets you nowhere. And poor delegation gets you nowhere. So there has to be a healthy balance. So we're going to set up all those different benchmarks. We're going to say in which methods we're going to use to communicate, which platforms we're going to use. We've already got the backup plan in case we lose certain technology, so on and so forth. We have to be able to organize all of these people, right? And all of the different resources we need. What money do we need? What property do we need? What supplies do we need? We then have to go through the leading element of being able to motivate and inspire our team members to see the vision and run for it. And while it's getting rougher and rougher, we have to keep motivating, inspiring, to keep going to that finish line, right? There's going to be some people that are going to fall off. But we're just going to keep everyone just going towards what that target is. And we have to track our progress along the way, because if we say we're going to go, if we're heading from A to M, as in Mary, Apple to Mary, if we somehow find ourselves stuck somewhere around Donald, and we've been stuck at Donald for a while, we need to know why. Or if somehow we didn't then proceed, we start, okay, so we start heading on over to, E for Eddie, and then somehow we just zoomed over to T. Well, how the heck did we get to T if we're supposed to be going to M for Mary? Like, how did we do that? We deviated, right? Something is wrong. So we need to be able to control for all those elements. See how on target or off target we are, looking at what resources we started off with compared to where we are at this phase, how we're doing in comparison to others in the industry, to other entities in our state, our nation, around the world, and then always being able to make whatever adjustments need to be made based on any external or internal factors that cause a shift. So any changes that take place inside our organization or any changes that take place outside of the organization. So using what's currently happening right now, here we are, March 19th, 2020, and we're noticing that various countries have been doing, this staggered shutdown of various conveniences, right? And we're going to call them conveniences because they are conveniences. There are restaurants, there are bars, there are libraries, museums, schools, things of that nature, right? Certain businesses have shut down. Others are still pushing strong because they're like, we have to keep providing these products and services, whether it's because it's through demand of customers or it's because of the demand of our bank account. But either way, there's a demand, and so we're going to keep driving until the government says you can't drive anymore. You can't do it anymore. So you have these things that you have to keep charting. You have to keep tracking. Another reason why we control through our reporting is because when the crisis is over, you get to now look backwards and see and chart the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of how your team responded and managed, and if you resolved that crisis, and then leading into your recovery phases, right? So I've already given you two of the other steps, which the step 5 is resolution. If you can successfully make it across that finish line of a crisis through whatever resolution, so whether it's because you came up with an alternative approach, or because there were some external forces that helped to alleviate the problem, whatever the case may be, there's a resolution. And so you have to be able to track all that and be able to outline all of the ways that the resources or the various solutions that came in. Because if this happens again, guess what you can go to? You know that these certain elements or people or resources is what happened, or you guys knew you put in this command and it stopped the flooding of a release of all of your emails to the public, whatever. That resolution is really important to be able to track. So it's mindful that you hold on to that data, that information, in case this ever happens again. Your 6th stage is recovery. Through anything you go through, you have to be able to recover from the impact, the turmoil, the chaos, whether it is giving birth, it is starting, whatever the case is. And I don't like to say that giving birth is a crisis, but for mothers that go through the process, they probably do feel like the earth is splitting open. But your body must recover, right? At the same token, any kind of major toil in that you undergo, whether it's physically, mentally, financially, emotionally, there has to be a recovery phase. And in that recovery phase, you're looking back and you're saying to yourself, what did we do great? What did we do good? What did we do okay? What did we do poorly with? And what did we just absolutely suck at, right? What did we were miserable in this part right here. We just really need to address this. But in all of those boxes that are checked, making sure that you're celebrating the ways in which you did good, great, excellent, blah, 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 but not beating yourself up for the ways in which you did awful or you failed, but using those as the lessons to now dissect, to say, now how can we turn these bad, awful, failing steps that we took, and how can we do better in case this ever happens again? Where did we get this wrong? Where were the wires twisted the wrong way? Where do we drop the ball? And identifying that, then we can then have a greater level of confidence that given a repeat of this same scenario, that we could we could land on the side of favor versus on the side of failure. And from there, you then can build off and build up other possible scenarios for other series of crisis management that you can consider doing mock role playing of sorts to kind of, consider all the other ways. So it's a great point in your rebuilding to be able to role play other possible scenarios equal to or greater than what you experience, so that you can actually be a few stages ahead the next time a crisis comes and that warning comes, right? When that wind starts to shift differently, or the sky starts to turn red, or the wind just stops. It was blowing, all of a sudden it just goes, and it's just nothing. People that live in certain states where we have tornadoes, the certain signs where all of a sudden there was the little turnstile was just a turn and just a turn and just a turn, and all of a sudden it just stops, and you can hear an ant squeaking on the ground. That is an unsettling moment, because there's only one or two possible things taking place. One, some kind of storm, most likely a tornado is coming, or two, it's end of the world. So for the most part, we know it's a tornado, right? So with that, you know what to do. If you are born, raised, lived in a state that has tornadoes seasonally, just about every single year, you know what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go, no matter if it's public, private, how to be able to counteract. It does not mean that you're going to survive the storm. It just means that you've now been programmed in what to do and what steps to execute to have a greater probability of surviving that storm. It's the same type of ingrained behavior and training and methodology that we must have in business. What do you do in a tornado? Boom. Now imagine taking a tornado and now flipping this into, what are we going to do in this crisis that can have the same devastating impact financially as a tornado would have on us, both physically and financially, right? And we don't think about that. An example, what was that? 2007, 2008. I moved here in 2007. I think the tornadoes ripped through here 2008. So Atlanta, by the way, if you don't know where I am. And it's amazing because people in Atlanta they're like, what? Like, you're not thinking about tornadoes ripping through downtown Atlanta. Like, you're thinking about, it's going to be out there in the boonies, out there where all that open land is. And so, yeah, we're not going to be, don't think about it. I mean, we have the warning systems in certain areas, Mapleton and other places, that you can hear the alarm, the thing that goes off. I think it's like every Wednesday during, I don't know, I think it's the summer months or something like that. And there was no plan. There was no plan for a natural disaster to tear up downtown. It was just absolute, like, what in the world? We look at the ice incident in Atlanta, and other states laughed at Atlanta. Oh, you guys, you don't even know how to do. You can't maneuver and blah blah blah. But the difference is, because people don't want to use perspective, they just like to criticize. Is that the state of Georgia, and specifically when you look at Metro Atlanta, because it does not snow here that often, and when it does, it doesn't really stick. The resources of, salt and sand or any other resources that would provide that stickability to create that surface to allow for traction of tires, those surfaces, especially the salt, would harden, and because it wouldn't be used for years. And now there are some ideas that can pop in your head about creating a different housing environment to keep that salt at a temperature that'll keep it from hardening, or maybe even investing in some kind of churning mechanism that will keep that salt churned at a slow spin, that could maybe be solar generated so that it's not taxing our power grid that much. There's things that you could think about post crisis in the recovery of saying, how can we do this? Now, one of the biggest problems that citizens had was that there was warnings, and what we criticized was the risk assessment and the response and the management to that, right? That's what got criticized, because you had upset parents, you had upset workers, you had upset everyone who they were stuck on highways and freeways and couldn't get to their kids and couldn't get home and all this different stuff. And they then look and see, wait a minute, you jerks had warning? Huh? And your assessment of this, that it wasn't that big of a deal, and you didn't then make sure to put out the salt and the sand and the whatever else that is needed to provide that absorbency to allow for the traction for our tires, so that people weren't just spinning out of control. And understand, it wasn't just people that were born and raised in Atlanta, because most folks that live here aren't even from here. You have people from up north who are used to snow that reaches the tops of mountains. Right? You had people that grew up in snow and ice, and they even said they were spinning out because it was nothing but black ice. Here's something that a lot of people outside of Atlanta don't realize, is that for whatever reason, it could be for conservation, I don't know, but a lot of our lighting on the highways are not lit. They're not on. We have light poles that are not on. So imagine driving in most of the cities and states that other parts of the U.S., there's number one, there's great lighting, and two, they already have the trucks out there, because you guys know it's muscle memory. You get the warning, you do the assessment of the warning, and you guys respond by having your trucks out there before the majority of humans are out there with their vehicles. In Georgia, when you look at I-285, it's one big circle that you have other highways feeding into, and there's not that much. The poles are there. I can tell you, the poles are there, but not all of the lights are on. So it's like, I don't know, I may need to count one night, like just go around and just count. Maybe it's every third or fourth light that may be on. So, like I said, it could be because they want to be more, conservative. I don't know. Then why have the poles? I don't know. Maybe they're going to convert them to solar. I don't know. I have no clue. But I do know that there's a lot of stretches of Atlanta highways, freeways that are not lit at night. Or they're not lit at early morning. So if you have black ice on that pavement, on that surface, the moment a tire hits that black ice, it's over. And for a lot of drivers, they don't know how to maneuver that vehicle when it gets into a spin. Most people look wherever they look, and they turn their hands in the exact same direction that they're looking, and that's what they end up hitting, is what they're looking. We already know this. And unless you go to, different driving schools, and, I went to Porsche racing school and the Ford Motor racing school, and had all of this extensive, training, but it does not guarantee 100% that when I get in that situation, I've been in a situation, I was both in that snow catastrophe and another one, and I was able to maneuver certain things. Now, it does not mean that all of a sudden one day I don't react, right? Remember, step 3 in the crisis is to respond. If I react instead of respond, I could find myself in a ditch, spun out because I looked over in the direction of the ditch versus looking at where I want my car to go and doing all the things with my throttle in order to keep that traction as much of a grip as possible. All right, now giving you guys enough of the engineering and all the other stuff to say that these are the things that you have to plan for as a leader. Just because snow only hits your city once every blue moon, the thing is that can and has snow hit our city before? Yes. So what is our response, management, and resolution if we're hit with a snowstorm? What are we going to do? Worst case, best case, mid case resolution of that, right? And then that way, when that time comes, guess what we're going to pull out? We're going to pull those teams into place because they've already been prepared mentally and all the other ways in order to say, all right, now let's pull out those files. This is what we're going to do. We already have the plan. Let's go ahead. Now we're going to go through all the stages, right? We've got our warning. Let's assess it. Let's see who could be impacted. Let us plan for the worst case. Now, the next time this came through, Atlanta did that. And I have to commend the former Mayor Reed for putting into play all of the steps in order to protect, to make sure we had less fatalities, less people stranded, less people terrified, less people without resources. Now, what was the the reaction from the masses of people? Oh, look at that. Nothing happened. And all this. They closed down schools, they closed down businesses, and nothing happened. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching this. I'm like, you guys are a bunch of idiots. You ridiculed the former mayor, because at the time he was still mayor. You ridiculed him because the city and state combined, right, and all the other cities, because, Atlanta took the hit for every other city within this metro. Like, there's about 12 plus cities. Atlanta took the hit for everyone. So no matter what happened in all the other cities, what was reported nationwide and worldwide was that it was Atlanta, right? Didn't matter if it happened in a whole another county that wasn't even next to Atlanta. But with that, people just tore into the city. They tore into the governor about the response and yada, 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 and the weather service. And everyone got a paddling for, a couple of months after that first major storm about whatever year that was, 2010, right? That's the one. And then we had another one. So with that, the teams come together, they form these task forces to make sure that they can do better the next go round. Next go round, they then, because the first time people complained that the schools weren't shut down and businesses weren't shut down and people didn't have time to get home and get their kids. Okay, so then the city plans, they prepare for all of those things, they check all those boxes, and then what do people say? They complain. So, the lesson in that is that as a leader, you have to understand there's always going to be at least 40% folks complaining. You just got to take it to the chin and say, all right, it doesn't matter. I still checked all of our internal boxes. And our internal boxes said we wanted to be able to reduce fatalities, accidents, injuries, stalled, people being, stalled. We wanted to make sure that kids were not stranded. Kids were not having to be stuck at school and their parents at work. We all the different internal boxes that we have. If we checked them, then whatever people say outside, we'll manage that. And hopefully you have a team that's dedicated to dealing with that. You have a team that is dedicated to all the communication efforts in order to properly educate the public on things so that they can, at some point, just silence themselves because they're reacting versus logistically breaking everything down and saying, oh, that made perfect sense. That was the best case scenario right there. They did it. We all got to come to and from, and those of us that didn't have to go to work, guess what? You didn't have to go to work. Shut up. Instead, if they had repeated the very thing they did a year or two earlier, people would have been calling for his job. So these are the things that we have to look at now. Fast forward to March 19, 2020, is that some of you may not have paid attention to the warning signs. You may not have done a risk assessment. Right now, you may not be responding, but you're reacting. And that's what we see when we're seeing the news and you're seeing people, getting, 700 things of toilet tissue and, somebody buying, 500 bottles of hand sanitizer and buying, 600 packs of SpaghettiOs or the jar cans of spaghetti. Like when you're seeing all this, that's because people are reacting. When you see what organizations are doing, look closely at what organizations are doing. Look closely, and when I mean organizations, I mean religious institutions. I mean financial institutions. I mean, schools, businesses, restaurants, governments. Look at how people are responding. Look at how they're managing, and then from that, take in consideration how you would maneuver through these things. If you have a business of your own, you need to understand, okay, I missed the warning, my risk assessment, but you can now go back into doing the risk assessment, right? Because you are not fully sure what your risks are. Right now, you're just, right? You're just reacting. You're just like a frenzied person in the middle of a mob. So what you need to do at this very stage, if you have not done so already, is assess your risk. Do not be conservative in that assessment. Do not say, oh, this is going to blow over in 2 weeks. I don't care if it blows over in 2 weeks. I need you to plan for if it doesn't fix, if it's not resolved, if there is no recovery in 12 months, what are you going to do as a business? That is how you should plan. People, don't be pessimistic. Don't plan for worst case. You have to plan for worst case. You should always plan for failing. I've said this time and time again, in different episodes. You should always plan for failure. Plan for it. And then reverse engineer it. Here is the failing point. Here is where we fall flat on our face, knock all of our teeth out, bubble up both of our eyes, our nose gets broken 2 different ways, we have a huge hump on our forehead, our cheeks are bruised, our chin is all busted, fingernails all broken all over the place. Plan for it. Worst case. So at this very moment, you need to hunker down as a leader. You need to hunker down as a manager of resources, looking at what resources you currently have and saying, can these resources last us 6 months, 12 months? If the answer is no, what are our plans A, B, C, D, F, right? What are we going to do to be able to pivot through this? How are we going to properly be able to manage this? How can we be able to salvage our relationships with our customers, our employees, and our vendors and suppliers, right? How are we going to be able to do all of this? You need to be able to, before you can start responding, assess where you are, assess where you will be, not where you hope to be. This ain't Fantasy Island. This ain't La La Land. Where's the worst case? What is the thing that scares you most? That is what you need to then be able to plan for. So assess where you really are. Don't be conservative with it. Really stretch yourself and say, okay, if everything is shut down for the next 6 months, does that mean your company goes belly up? If it does, what does that mean? In what ways? What does that mean psychologically, financially, physically? What does that mean? How have you already been impacted? How has this crisis already impacted you, your team members, all of the different things, and not just that financial component. Look at the psychological, the physiological. Look at all the layers that make you. How has it impacted you spiritually, emotionally? Look at all the things that make up you, all the things that make up your team members. I don't care if your team members is 1 person or 100 people or 1,000 people. Consider looking at all of those people and saying, how have you currently been impacted, and what is the risk What is the potential risk in the future? And then from there, you can start going into how we're going to respond, how we're going to manage, how we're going to resolve, and what we're going to do in the recovery. What are the things that we're going to jump right into to look back and to say how to deal with something similar or exactly the same in the future? That is the 3 phases: pre, during, the middle of hell, and after you get out of hell, and all of the 6 stages that make up those 3 phases. That is what you must do, not just now during this COVID-19 crisis, but in all potential crises that are taking place now and in the future. Because COVID-19 is not our only crisis. There's all kinds of stuff. Folks are still in the middle of different, outbreaks of all kinds of wars and things. You think people stop shooting and fighting because they heard about some epidemic that turned into a pandemic and it hasn't hit their country yet? Do you think they said, oh, we're going to call a truce? No, so people are still dying in other countries that have not experienced COVID yet. So let's understand that we have to always be mindful of that. It is not being pessimistic. It's not being negative. It's not being dark. It's just being realistic that the world turns, and in the turning, there is always friction. And in that friction, sparks fly, and in the sparking flying, something's going to catch on and be combustible, and there you go, right? And that is just the way that the life is. And so we have to be able to plan for all of the possible what ifs. So I hope that this episode has been informative, enlightening, empowering. I hope that you can jump right into your leadership boots and suits and to start being able to position yourself. If you don't have a company yet, you want to start a company, and now you're like, oh, hell no. Don't let this current crisis, don't let it scare you off. Now allow it to plan properly. So many people just slap together a business plan, and in that business plan, and never considered all the what ifs. Your business plan is what you're supposed to be pulling out right now. So if you pull out your business plan and you didn't have crisis management up in that bad boy, guess what you need to insert in there now? So while you have chosen to self-isolate, you need to go ahead and start getting on that little internet and start looking up all the different ways in which you can address the needs of your future or current company, and so that you can learn from other people's lessons, right? Because we don't need to call them mistakes; they're lessons. Every company, every cruise line, every hotel, every restaurant, every bank, every mom and pop shop, everyone is learning a lesson. And that lesson is the very things that we said to small business from the very jump of you need the 6 to 12 to 18 months of reserves. People need to position themselves to have that. So sometimes versus trying to grow big and fast, maybe what you need to do is focus on making sure that your company can always sustain itself for 12 to 18 months during and after a crisis. Imagine having that. That is empowering. Imagine having an account set aside that every single time you're doing your accounts payable and receivable and everything is totaling out, and you turn around and you have that designated amount that goes over for the emergency fund, for crisis management, whatever little title you want to call it, that when you have that set aside and you're making sure that it is the 12 to 18 months, right? And whatever percentage that comes up to monthly, quarterly, it doesn't matter. However you factor that you have it, you can stand in confidence. You can then speak confidently to your team members and say, we're good. So we may be shut down, but guess what? Your pay, you're still going to get paid while we're shut down. You still have benefits while we're shut down. Don't sweat it. Your paycheck's going to be direct deposit in your account every 2 weeks, every month, however your structure's set up. That is what we need to strive for. So let this all be a lesson. Don't sit back and be boo-hooing and drying your tears in your armpits. No. This is the time as a leader to be what you want to see in the world, what you're disappointed in other people and other leaders and other organizations. You need to say, what do I want to see? That's what you then need to project. That's what you need to invest in your own idea and your own business. Do it now. Don't do it later. No, do it now. Sit down, map it out. I don't care if you use a piece of paper. I don't care. Grab your kids' little coloring book. I don't care what you have to do, but sit down and map these things out so that you can be able to present the type of environment and ecosystem for your organization that can thrive no matter what, but most definitely during crisis. So, with that, you know what that is? You know that music. It's that time again, folks. Time to wrap up and go our separate ways. Until next week, if you have any questions or suggestions about this show, if you'd like to be able to give feedback on the things that I've shared today, please email them to don'tcallitsmallbiz with a Z at gmail.com. With that, be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook and on Twitter. On Instagram and Twitter, we're at Foreman LLC. On Facebook, we're at Foreman and Associates. You know that our Twitter handle for this podcast is It Ain't Small. Make sure that you guys follow us, share us with your friends, colleagues, and family. And, you know, now that most of you are at home, working from home, or just chilling at home, you can also catch up on all of our previous episodes. This is episode 34, so you have 33 other episodes to listen to. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Natasha L. Foreman. Reach out to me. Say hello. Share your story. I look forward to meeting you and hearing from you. Don't forget that you can also text us. You should know the number. Some of you guys, I'm not even giving the number anymore. I'm so tired of folks calling that number. I said text. I'm not even giving it again. Shout out to Shane Ivers. This song, Higher Up, is by the amazing Shane Ivers. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Don't Call It Small Business Podcast, for sharing these episodes with others, and for your continued support. And don't forget what I tell you on each and every episode. Don't call what you're planning, thinking, dreaming, or doing little or small. Go big, go bold, or go nowhere. I'll see you here next week for episode 35 of Don't Call It Small Business. Have a super day, an awesome week. Be safe. Please keep your hands washed and cleaned. Come on now. I'm surprised that folks are having to learn this. You should have learned this back in preschool. Some of y'all are nasty. But all seriousness, please be safe. Keep yourself clean. Keep yourself safe. Get some puzzles, some games. As I started doing today, matter of fact, with Tracy Wright, we did a virtual lunch today. And tonight, I'll be doing a virtual dinner with one of my other girlfriends. So I'm scheduling these every week. So why don't you guys try it too? Use Facebook, Skype, whatever, and use your video. That's what you got webcams for. Connect with everyone. And you should do it virus or no virus. Be able to reach across the world. You got family everywhere. Let's do it, y'all. Have a great day and week. See you soon.